I want to tell you a story. I really don't care if you believe me. I know that what I'm about to say might sound frightening, but please don't be frightened. Something wonderful has happened to me, and if you're reading this, I think it could happen to you too. Let me tell you about a miracle. It was about a month ago that my grandfather passed on due to complications from his stroke late last year. He and I were very close, and after his stroke I had taken care of my grandmother and him the best I could while still making my way through university. The day of the funeral service, it rained like hell. The ground of the tiny cemetery on the corner of Elk and Monroe turned to mush underfoot, and a few unfortunate folks got mud all over their funeral blacks. The service had been incredibly hard for me, and because I had a lot of difficulty crying around my family and friends, I decided to stay back from the burial service so I could get a couple minutes to honestly grieve. That's when I saw him. The cemetery's caretaker stood out in the pouring rain looking underdressed and soaked to the bone. He stood a respectful distance away from the service, clearly not wanting attention, but I could tell he was shivering, so I walked over with my black umbrella to give him some relief. When I got closer, the first thing I noticed was that he was young. Under his thick blonde beard, he couldn't have been more than a year or two older than me. The second thing I noticed was an odor that hung around him, thick and cool. It wasn't a terrible smell, more that he smelled like wet black earth. Even more so than the whole world seemed to smell of it in the rain, and a sort of cinnamon scent I couldn't quite place. "That's very kind of you, sir," he said in a surprisingly soft voice. "It's just that you looked cold," I stammered out, slightly off balance from the age, the smell, and now the voice. The caretaker gestured out to the mass of black umbrellas and solemn faces. "Who was he to you?" he asked in that soft, almost cautious voice. "My grandfather. I loved him dearly," I said, the second half of the sentence falling lame even to my own ears. "You and all those people out there." He gestured with a long-nailed hand out to my friends and family. "I've worked this plot for a long time, seen all sorts go into the earth. You can always tell when it was a well-loved one. Something in the faces of the mourners. I can't quite explain, but it's there." He picked each word carefully like an artist selecting just the right brush. As he spoke, I caught a whiff of his breath, and the smell that hung around him hit me even harder, this time less pleasant and with an underlying rank sweetness. "How long have you worked here?" I inquired, eager to change the subject as my roiling emotions threatened to bubble over again. "A good long while now. I don't bother keeping track. The work's rewarding, and this is a good place, a calm and quiet place." His face spoke of a life that hadn't always been full of calm and quiet places. I couldn't disagree with him though. Despite the rain, or maybe even because of it, the cemetery had almost an ethereal stillness. And looking over the well-cleaned headstones, I could see how this place could be someone's haven if not mine. We made a sort of gentle conversation that slowly spun out into silence. Then we stood for a while, listening to the rain patter on the fabric of the umbrella we shared, and watching the service from afar. It wasn't until just before I was about to excuse myself to return to the last minutes of the service that he spoke again. "I don't think most people would have shared their umbrella," he mused without looking away from the mourners and meeting my eyes. "Why's that?" I asked, startled out of my thoughts. "They're uncomfortable with people like me, people who are proximate to death and decay. Thank you for being different, and thank you for the conversation. I think it's time you get back to your grandfather. They're about to begin the lowering." He offered one of his long-nailed hands. I took it with only the slightest hesitation. His grip was strong, painfully so. As he squeezed my hand, he leaned in, breath stinking of the grave. He said, "Good deeds are rewarded, my friend. Run along now." The biting grip disappeared as quick as it came on, and I did my best to politely excuse myself without appearing shaken. I didn't notice until later, but those long, snaggled fingernails had bitten into the meat of my right hand in 2 places, forming a shallow V-shaped cut. There was a small reception after at my grandparents' house. We told stories about my grandfather, some of which I had never heard until then. It felt like once the ritual of viewing and funeral and burial were complete, my grandfather had somehow become a real person again, if that makes any sense. I felt closer to him then than I had when I was helping to carry the casket. The house seemed to hold something of his presence that his cold body couldn't match. I never expected a funeral to have snacks, but the reception had tons of food, none of which I had much of an appetite for. Eventually, I excused myself. I was exhausted, and I had to get ready for school the next day. As I left, my grandmother insisted I take some of my grandfather's brandy with me. She said she wouldn't drink it anyway and that brandy is good for the constitution. When I asked her why that was important, she said with simple finality, "You just look a bit pale, that's all." That night I dreamed of the cemetery on the corner of Elk and Monroe. I dreamed of the silent headstones at night, how the place would look lit only by the streetlight spilling over the high wall that surrounded it. I dreamed that I was late to my grandfather's funeral, that I was dressed in my blacks and my dress shoes were getting stuck in the sucking, grasping mud, and when I finally made it to the grave, everybody was long gone. I had something that I meant to give my grandfather before he was buried, a little silver fork. And so I began to dig with my hands into the filled grave so that I could give him this one last thing, and he could give me something that I wanted in return. As I dug into the soaked earth, the smell of the grave filled my nose, and my stomach bubbled and stirred uncomfortably. I excavated my way down, silver fork held in my teeth before my nails scratched on the lid of the coffin. Suddenly, the flash of lamplight came over me. I woke up in a feverish sweat, my mouth full of a grungy, unclean, sick taste. My bones ached, and I knew immediately that I would not be making it to class today. I lay a while in my sticky, damp sheets. The dream was still pressed into the forefront of my consciousness. The pure logic of it bemused me. My fevered brain raked over the details of the dream. Only as I pulled my mind away from the empty, sodden cemetery on the corner of Elk and Monroe did I realize just how hungry I was. In all the events of yesterday, I had completely forgotten to eat. I hadn't had any appetite at the reception, and once I had got home, I had been too preoccupied by my grief and preparations for school. When I awoke, fevered as I was starving. I peeled myself out of my sheets and walked tenderly through my apartment. I filled a glass with water and sucked it down to try to soothe my aching head. It did no good. When I opened my refrigerator, a pungent cacophony of odors hit me in waves. I slammed the fridge door shut before the smell made me sick. Has something gone off in there? I wondered to myself. The worst part was that the horrible smell hadn't allayed my hunger for more than a few seconds. I grabbed a piece of bread and started chewing it, but the texture suddenly felt all wrong, and I hadn't gotten more than a bite down when I had to run to my sink to retch. Bent over the sink, quivering with tremors and smelling my own thin vomit, I realized that maybe the best thing I could do for myself was to go back to bed. After I sent off a few short emails to my professors explaining that I was ill, I decided I would shower off the tacky sweat residue that clung to my skin. As I reached for my soap in the shower, I noticed something strange on my hand. At first, I thought it was an ink stain, but when I inspected the V-shaped mark on the bottom of my right hand, I realized that the 2 small cuts that the caretaker's fingernails had made had scabbed over completely black. I was immediately worried that the cut had become infected or something, but there was no inflammation, and when I prodded it gently, it didn't sting any more than your typical scab. After I finished my shower, I opted to dab some polysporin on and around it and go back to my bed. I took a long while getting back to sleep between the fever and the stomach-cramping hunger. But when I did, my dreams were strange again. I dreamed of family dinners in the cemetery. I dreamed of the caretaker with his shovel. I dreamed of him filling graves and emptying them. I dreamed about the sound a shovel makes when it hits the roof of a casket, like the sound of a pirate striking buried treasure. I dreamed of smelling that damp dirt and cinnamon smell, and when I woke late in the evening, my fever had grown far worse, and my mouth was watering. I was getting worse. I was a pale and shaking mess, completely unable to keep a bite of solid food down. When I tried a sip of my grandfather's brandy, I nearly spat it out. A rancid flavor had surpassed even the burn of alcohol in it. I resolved to drink only water until this flu or fever had passed, and I shivered out the rest of the evening on my couch, trying to distract myself from the vicious combination of malaise and hunger. I dozed intermittently, but always started awake from strange dreams full of grave dirt. 48 hours after my grandfather's funeral, I decided I was going to go to the emergency room. The fever was bad, the hunger was worse. I had wondered if I was well enough to drive, but ultimately decided that if this was contagious, it would be best for everyone if I tried to avoid exposing anyone. By the time I had walked out to my car, my heart was racing with effort and a cloud of lightheadedness hung over me. I sat in my car for a full 8 minutes before I felt clear-headed enough to start it. Even as I started to drive, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake in trying to drive. My attention kept wandering and I would lose seconds at a time, realizing I had run a yellow light or missed a turn. My eyes kept straying to brightly lit fast food signs, but I knew as soon as the greasy paper bag was passed over to me, I wouldn't be able to take a single bite. I rolled down my window to get some cool air on my face. That's when I realized where I was. The smell washed over me and I felt my stomach growl maddeningly. It took a moment to identify. It was rich and cool, a simultaneously wet and dry odor. It was herby with an earthy note and the slightest hint of fruitiness. I had visions of sweet, cool fruits being pulled from rich, damp earth. My focus drifted in the tantalizing presence of this smell until the squawk of a car horn behind me snapped me out of my daze. The light at the intersection of Elk and Siemens had changed to green, and I had been idling in front of it for who knows how long. I goosed the gas pedal, eyes scanning for the source of the delicious smell when I saw it. The next intersection was Elk and Monroe. The cemetery gate on the corner stood wide open, flanked by stone angels. And as I drove towards it, the sensations of smell and hunger threatened to overwhelm me, matched only by my internal horror. How could it be? How could it smell so right? There was nothing for me there, only the headstones of the dirt and deep within the earth, gently moldering, fermenting, the many corpses with their pale flesh. I pulled away from the thought like it was a fat black spider discovered walking over my pillow. It was the fever. It's making me delirious, I reasoned to myself. I immediately turned off the street that led to the cemetery gates, and in a daze drove halfway home before I remembered I had planned to go to the hospital. I was so desperate to get distance away from those gates and that horrid, wonderful smell that I couldn't even bring myself to turn back. Fatigue was washing over me in dark waves, and if not for the bone-deep horror that gripped me, I might have fallen asleep at the wheel. When I got back to my apartment, I pulled into my stall at a steep angle and stumbled to the elevator, resting my burning head against the cool metal of the elevator door frame as I waited for its arrival. I'll call 911 tomorrow if I'm not better, I bargained with myself. When I got into my apartment, fever had turned to chills and I hid under the sheets, body quaking and mind reeling. Even as I lay there, horror mingled with wanting into a primordial stew of feeling. Red and black fantasies played at the edge of my brain before swallowing me whole as I drifted off to uneasy sleep. In those dreams, I was a farmer in a field of dark soil and pale stones. I moved confidently with hoe and shovel, digging and planting deep within the earth. I pulled a strange and lovely crop from the ground and ate it under the stars. I was content. I basked in the night's breeze and drew in the odor of the land and my harvest moldering below its surface, and I was so at peace. But it was only a dream. I awoke. The fever had broken, the hunger had grown. When my eyes snapped open in the night-black room, I knew where my medicine was. The world had shrunk into a single point of rough need, and I rose from the chill sheets with a blank-minded purpose. Time slipped. I was in the car. The blue dashboard clock read 2:55. I watched the street lamps float past my car and I rolled down my windows. I breathed deeply of the night air and I caught the faintest hint of it on the wind. Time slipped. The car had stopped. I had pulled into the parking lot. Behind me, the intersection lights cast a pale green hue over the scene. The smell was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The stone angels seemed to beckon me in with outstretched hands. The gate was open even though the sign said it was closed. I took the first step on the gravel path. Time slipped. I was on my knees, a headstone out in front of me. I must have looked from afar like some midnight mourner, but I hadn't even read the name. I stared down into the dirt and saw it had already begun ripping up the sod, revealing the pregnant soil beneath. Was there one last ounce of hesitation in me? No, I don't think there was. I could smell her waiting for me down there, 6 feet of earth, and it still filled my nose like honey. I began to dig with my hands, desperately scrabbling at the earth. Dirt forcing itself under my nails, small rocks cutting my palms. I didn't care. I began to weep as I realized I couldn't possibly do this without a shovel or some tool. That's when the light washed over me and my heart froze. It was him. The caretaker stood with an ancient hurricane lantern in hand, its light casting stark shadows over his face. In this light, he looked far older than I remembered. I had frozen, dirt in both hands at the sight of him. I opened my mouth to say something, and all that came out were thick rivulets of drool. My mind raced. The smell drove me to dig, my brain drove me to run. I had almost decided on trying to bludgeon the caretaker and make a run for it when he spoke in that soft voice. "You poor boy, you must be starving." His eyes were solemn as he looked at me. Could it have been empathy? I can explain, I started. No idea what I was going to say, overwhelmed completely. "You don't have to, just come with me. Let's set you right," he said. There was perhaps the faintest hint of a smile on his face then. Perhaps it was just a trick of the guttering lamplight. I let the dirt fall from my blackened hands and rose from my knee-deep hole in the earth. "What's happening to me?" I asked. The shame ran back into me like a flood and I began to blubber again, spit and snot mingling around my mouth. There, my boy." The caretaker closed the distance between us and held me in his arms for a minute, before he looked me in the eyes with utter seriousness. "Something wonderful, I promise. You'll be feeling right as rain if you just walk with me now. You've come a very long way, but you only have a few more steps." He began to lead me gently down the path. Gravel crunched underfoot and was the only sound in the silence of the cemetery. I saw that we were coming to the caretaker's workshop. It was a small white building, almost a church in miniature. From within, unsteady candlelight burned. We entered to the smell of motor oil and sawdust, and above it all, the heavenly odor of the rotted dead. When we came to the workshop's back room, the table was already set. Fine china and small silver forks and wicked sharp knives set for two. The centerpiece of the wide table was a long oak coffin, half rotted away. Candles had been placed at the corners of the coffin, and the caretaker bade me sit at one of the set places. Reaching into his coat pocket, he brought out a crowded keychain and carefully selected one. He slid it into the lock, and as I heard the click of it coming open, it was all I could do not to leap from my chair and push him aside, as the smell of tantalizing rot seemed to double in the room. He spoke some words then, some I understood and some that I did not. It was a benediction of sorts, a thanksgiving. Blessed is the carrion, and blessed in he who tasteth the graveyard's fruit. We thank the ground for yielding her gifts to us. We thank the stars for sheltering us. We thank the empty vessel for remembering life, that it may be passed to us. Blessed are we by dark earth and black heavens, that we shall feast tonight. He spoke it with whispered ritual cadence, and then the small silver knife was in his hands and he was cutting. I watched as he deftly split rotted flesh from the corpse of a woman. The meat was dry in places, wet in others. It was speckled with pale purples and reds. He started with the cheek. He separated it with a few quick strokes, revealing pale jaw and teeth underneath, and then he set it on my plate. Take, eat, live. The three words were in the same ritual cadence, and as soon as he spoke, I descended on the meat with the desperation of a drowning man. It was like nothing I had ever tasted. Black, greasy, mealy, and yet sweeter than honeydew. More intoxicating than wine. It satisfied the indescribable need that bound itself in tight coils throughout my body. It was pure relief. The caretaker placed slice after slice of the prime cuts on my plate, and my aching, screaming hunger was finally answered. When I had eaten my fill, the caretaker set a few pieces on his own plate, and then closed and locked the coffin lid. As I sat in a warm haze of emotion and satiation, he broke the silence. He spoke to me of many things that long and deep night. I will not tell you most of it. He spoke to me of dark earth, old countries, and ancient laws. He told me of his life, long and sweet, how he had worked plots like these since he was an apprentice under a master far older than he was even now. That night he showed me the grandness of what I had become, the beauty and the comfort of it. He offered me a job. He offered me a life. When I asked him why choose me, his answer was simple. When we met, I told you that good deeds should be rewarded. Yes, I have no greater gift for you than this. He gestured at the dining ware and the candles burning low. I am in need of an apprentice besides. I chose you because nobody had shared an umbrella with me in my long years of this work. Few have ever shared more than a couple terse words with me. I scrub the headstones clean, keep the plots free of weeds. In my work, I have done nothing but bring closure and comfort, and I am made a pariah for it. I have never done harm to the living, have never taken anything that wasn't willingly surrendered to the earth. I have lived a graceful but lonely life since I came to this country, and I want to share the goodness of it with somebody. It seemed right that it was you. It did seem right. I've been working at the cemetery on the corner of Elk and Monroe for 3 months now. I've dropped out of university, I'm just too busy. The hours are good, the company is excellent. 6 days a week in the shade of the cemetery where the air is sweet and cool. Looking back, I do not know what I was afraid of. The illness is already a distant memory and the reward was more than enough. As for the appetites, the caretaker is right. We don't take anything that wasn't given to our cemetery. We serve in the moment of people's mourning and are paid our wages under the sheltering night sky. The caretaker has been very pleased with my work. Even with the two of us, we were just so busy. I have no idea how he managed it alone for so long. The dead keep coming in the gates, carried on the shoulders of their loved ones, and we plant them deep in our soil to ripen. I think he'll be hiring again soon. We just need to find the right fit. Stop by someday if you're in the area. We're on the corner of Elk and Monroe. We'd love to say hello and shake your hand.